What if a fleeting lapse in judgment led to a secret so perilous that it threatened to unravel everything you've built? That night, I didn't just open a door, I opened Pandora's box. When my stepson walked in, the truth I'd been hiding was exposed, forever altering the course of our lives. I wasn't expecting anyone home. The house was quiet, dimly lit by the warm glow of scattered lamps, while rain gently pattered against the windows. I had poured myself a glass of rich red wine and settled into the solitude of my room, indulging in a rare moment of peace. My husband, Thomas, was away on another business trip. While I had grown accustomed to his absences, this time felt different. I wasn't just lonely, I was restless, an ache I couldn't quite name gnawing at me. Loneliness has a way of creeping in unexpectedly. As I poured another glass, I made a choice, a private one, something to fill the void, even if only briefly. Just as I began to relish this indulgence, I heard a faint noise outside my door. Initially, I attributed it to the wind rattling the old frame or the house settling, but then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My pulse quickened, yet I reassured myself it was nothing. Lucas had mentioned plans to go out with friends, but a chill ran down my spine when I heard his voice, soft yet disturbingly close. "Ava, are you okay in there?" Panic swept over me. The room was dark, illuminated only by the flickering glow of the television. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the remote, desperate to switch it off. The damning sounds persisted, echoing louder in the tense silence. "Ava?" His voice came again, closer this time. Before I could gather the composure to respond and send him away, the door creaked open. I hadn't locked it. There he stood in the doorway, eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, we were ensnared in a web of shock and embarrassment. I questioned what I expected him to do, turn away, laugh, or perhaps make a biting remark. Instead, what I saw reflected back was unexpected curiosity. He stammered, glancing between me and the screen, then looking away, as if grappling with the intensity of the moment. "It's not my fault," I managed to say, my words tumbling out in a stutter. "It's not what it looks like." Heat flooded my cheeks as I scrambled for an excuse, but nothing came. The tension in the room thickened around us. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I'll let you go. I should go." But instead of moving away, he lingered, his gaze fixed on me. At that moment, something shifted within me. It was more than just embarrassment or awkwardness. It felt like an unspoken understanding that we would both remember this incident vividly. When the door finally closed and I was left alone, I sat in silence, still clutching my wine glass, my heart racing. I wasn't scared. A different sensation coursed through me. Deep down, I recognized that some lines, once crossed, can never be redrawn. This was only the beginning. When Lucas moved back home, I expected to find the same reserved, distant boy I had known years ago when Thomas and I married. But he was no longer a boy. At 25, he exuded a quiet confidence and an easy charm that I hadn't noticed before. I tried to convince myself that acknowledging such changes was inappropriate, yet every encounter with him stirred an unsettling awareness within me. It wasn't merely the embarrassment of being caught in a vulnerable moment. It was the curiosity reflected in his eyes and the way he hesitated, as if he had witnessed something both intriguing and mortifying. Ignoring him proved difficult. I often retreated into the kitchen whenever I heard his footsteps or pretended to be busy in the garden. Still, Lucas seemed determined to break through the awkward silence that had enveloped us. One evening, as I washed dishes, he knocked on the kitchen door. "Hey," he said, leaning casually against the frame. "I didn't mean to scare you." I kept my gaze fixed on the suds, feeling a mix of intrigue and mortification. "It's fine. I should have locked the door, you don't have to explain," I replied. "Everyone deserves their privacy," he said, pausing before adding, "But you seemed upset. Are you okay?" His question caught me off guard. It had been years since someone genuinely cared about my feelings. Thomas was often too preoccupied with work, and I had learned to bury my emotions beneath the facade of a perfect wife. "I'm fine," I responded too quickly, then softened. "Thank you for asking." He nodded, but didn't move. His presence filled the small kitchen, and the air between us shifted, charged with unspoken tension. Over the next few weeks, that tension lingered, wrapping around us in subtle, insidious ways. Lucas's attentiveness was a stark contrast to Thomas's indifference, and I found myself increasingly drawn to him, caught in an unexpected rhythm that I had never anticipated. We had just returned from a discreet outing to a nearby park when an unexpected visitor appeared on our front porch, Naomi, Lucas's ex-girlfriend. Her arms were crossed and a sly smile lingered on her lips as she said, "Lucas, long time no see." Her eyes flicked to me, lingering for a fraction of a second too long, sending an uneasy chill down my spine. Naomi's tone was deceptively neutral as she asked, "What are you doing here?" "Just thought I'd stop by," she replied sweetly, though her expression hinted at something more sinister. I had been thinking about her a lot lately, and now it seemed she was acutely aware of something between us. This marked the beginning of a downward spiral. We hadn't expected Naomi to show up, and she was far more cunning than we had anticipated. She excelled at digging into irrelevant matters, and it wasn't long before she began asking probing questions that made both Lucas and me uncomfortable. We were reluctant to answer because the stakes were rising, and the tension in the air was palpable. I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Naomi's visit had thrown everything into disarray. She claimed her appearance was spontaneous, but I could sense it was calculating. Her gaze lingered on Lucas for one fraction of a second too long whenever she thought I wasn't watching, and her smile felt more like a warning than a greeting. Lucas and I attempted to brush off her presence, telling ourselves she was merely a distraction, an inconvenient reminder of his past that held no significance in our present. Yet, days later, I was still reeling from her visit. When Thomas called to inform me that his business trip would be extended, I felt the weight of guilt press heavily on my chest. He sounded distant, preoccupied with work rather than the wife awaiting him at home. He reassured me he'd be back in 2 or 3 weeks, urging me to take care of myself. Despite his words, relief washed over me, mingled with anxiety about our secret. That night, a storm rolled in. Rain drummed relentlessly against the roof and windows, and distant thunder echoed like a foreboding warning. The power flickered briefly before plunging us into darkness. I lit candles, hoping to find solace in a book, yet my nerves were on edge when I heard Lucas's voice calling from downstairs. "Ava, are you okay up there?" Thomas's voice reached me, filled with concern. "I'm fine," I replied calmly. Moments later, his flashlight beam pierced the darkness as he climbed the staircase to join me. "I don't mind the candles," he said with a grin, asking if he could stay with me. We found ourselves on the living room floor, wrapped in a blanket while the storm raged outside. Lucas had brought a bottle of whiskey from the kitchen, and we took turns passing it back and forth, letting its warmth chase away the chill in the air. "You ever wonder what you'd be doing if you weren't here?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I responded, a hint of defensiveness creeping into my voice. "If you hadn't married Thomas? If you weren't stuck in this house all the time?" Even as the words left my mouth, they felt empty. Lucas raised an eyebrow, studying my expression. "Aren't you? You never seem happy. I think you deserve more than this." His words, gentle yet piercing, made my heart twist. I wanted to declare that he was wrong, that I was perfectly content. Yet as I opened my mouth, the truth spilled out. "I don't know what I'd be doing," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I think about my life and what it could have been if I'd made different choices. But it doesn't matter now, does it? This is my life." Lucas leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. The tension simmering between us was electric, building over the past weeks. I should have resisted, but when his hand brushed against mine, I felt an undeniable pull to give in. I didn't pull back. In the days that followed, our stolen moments multiplied. Whether it was wandering through the farmer's market or hiking on secluded trails, it was more than just the thrill of being together. He looked at me with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. One afternoon, we ended up at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. The nearly empty space offered a sense of refuge, and we settled into a booth obscured in the corner. Our knees brushed beneath the table as I stirred my coffee absently. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life," I confessed, the words rushing out almost against my will. Lucas tilted his head, studying me intently. "Why do you say that?" "Because this isn't who I am," I said quietly, the admission both liberating and terrifying. "I'm not the kind of person who does this." He reached across the table, covering my hand with his, an intimate gesture that sent a jolt through my chest. Maybe you are. Maybe you just didn't know it until now. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the shadow that loomed over us. Naomi wasn't finished with us yet. Despite Lucas's insistence that we were just family, she wasn't convinced. That evening, I returned from the grocery store to find her car parked outside our house. As I stepped inside, I found her in the living room, her voice sharp with accusation. "You're lying to me," she declared, her face a mask of fury. "You're being ridiculous, Naomi," Lucas replied, his tone a mix of calm and firmness. At that moment, her gaze snapped to me. "You're part of this, aren't you? What's going on between you two?" I struggled to keep my composure, my heart hammering in my chest. "Naomi, this isn't appropriate." "Oh, it's very appropriate," she shot back, venom dripping from each word. "You think I don't know what's happening? I've seen the way you look at each other. Do you really think you can keep this a secret?" My heart raced, but I steeled myself. "You're mistaken," I replied evenly. "I think it's time for you to leave." Naomi's smile was sharp, her eyes glinting with malice. "I'll leave, but this isn't over." Once she was gone, Lucas and I sat in the suffocating silence, tension thick in the air. "She knows," I whispered, my pulse racing. "But she doesn't have proof." "Even if she doesn't," Lucas said, doubt creeping into his voice, "she won't let this go." He reached for my hand, his grip calm, yet it felt like a lifeline. Guilt settled heavily on my chest. Every conversation with Thomas reinforced the precarious nature of our situation. The longer we maintained our charade, the harder it became to justify. Naomi's threat loomed over us like a dark cloud, ready to unleash a storm. "She's just talking," Lucas assured me one evening, his arm draped casually over the back of the couch as we huddled together. "It's not just talk," I countered, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "You didn't see her when she left. She knows we're connected and is looking for a way to destroy us. What should I do? Pay her off?" His annoyance flared but quickly dissipated. "I'll handle it," he promised, though the uncertainty hung between us like a fragile thread. 3 days later, Thomas returned home unexpectedly. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door creak open, the weight of reality settling over me. Lucas was upstairs, and even though nothing incriminating was visible, the adrenaline surged as I envisioned the two men crossing paths. "Ava," Thomas called, his travel-worn voice echoing through the house. I forced a cheerful tone, wiping my hands on a dish towel before turning to greet him. He stepped into the kitchen, setting down his suitcase. The lines around his mouth seemed deeper than usual. "I didn't know you were coming back early. Got through the meetings quicker than expected." Thomas scanned the room, and I sensed an inquiry forming in his mind about Lucas. He had never shown much interest in Lucas before. "I saw Naomi's car parked outside the other day when I called to check in. What's that about?" My heart raced, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. "I didn't see her." "Maybe she stopped by to talk to Lucas," I suggested casually. Thomas nodded but didn't press further. However, the mere mention of Naomi left a sour taste in my mouth. It wasn't long before Naomi reappeared. One evening, while Thomas was out running errands, I returned from a walk to find her waiting on the front porch, arms crossed and eyes glinting with malice. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady, sensing her upper hand. Ignoring her wasn't an option. Her determination was palpable. "What do you want, Naomi?" I asked, striving to maintain my composure. "I like your attitude," she replied, her smirk icy. "But let's cut to the chase. I want Lucas." Her words were sharp and unapologetic, and I immediately grasped her intent. "It's not going to last," she continued. "So why don't you step aside and let him come back to me? Lucas is a grown man. He can make his own decisions," I shot back bitterly. Her smile broadened, clearly amused. "Of course. But how do you think Thomas would feel if he knew about your little arrangement? Or the rest of the world, for that matter?" My throat tightened. "You wouldn't, would you?" Her voice dropped into a chilling whisper. "All it would take is one little text, one photo, one message, and your perfect life could come crashing down." That night, I confided everything to Lucas. "We have to stop her. If she tells Thomas, it'll be the end for both of us." He nodded solemnly, resolve etched on his face. "I'll talk to her. I'll make her understand. But when he returned from their meeting the next day, his face was pale and his fists clenched. "She's not backing down," he said, the weight of impending disaster hanging heavily between us. "She wants money, lots of it." My stomach churned at the prospect. 50,000? I continued, the figure hanging ominously in the air. "She claims it's for her silence, but we can't afford to give in. She'll only come back for more." Lucas stood abruptly, frustration boiling over. "What do you suggest, Ava? Because I'm out of ideas." I had no answers. Turning to my closest friend, Claire, I felt a sense of desperation. She had always been sharp and resourceful, but involving her in this mess weighed heavily on me. I recounted my earlier confrontation with Naomi, recalling her disbelief when I confessed the truth. "Ava, do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" she'd said, her eyes wide. I felt the sting of tears as I reminded Claire, "I never planned for this to happen." "Okay," Claire replied, regaining her focus. "Let's think this through. Naomi's a problem, but she's not invincible. There has to be something we can use against her." It turned out there was. Claire delved into Naomi's past, uncovering a trail of unpaid debts and legal troubles. Armed with this information, we devised a plan to confront her. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop on the edge of town, the air thick with tension as we waited at a corner table. When Naomi arrived, her confident demeanor bordered on smug. "I'm flattered," she said, settling into the seat across from us. "Didn't think you'd have the guts to face me." Claire slid a folder across the table. Naomi opened it, her composure slipping as the contents sank in. "Where did you get this?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "That's not important," Claire replied coolly. "What is crucial is that we know who you really are. If you keep pushing us, we won't hesitate to expose you." Naomi's cockiness faltered, but she quickly regained her poise. "You think this scares me? I have nothing to lose," she shot back. "But Lucas does, and so do I. Here's the deal. You walk away now, and we won't come after you. But if you even breathe a word to Thomas or anyone else, believe me, we'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you." For a moment, I thought she might call our bluff, but then she stood, clutching the folder tightly. "You'll regret this," she hissed before storming out. Her departure, which should have brought relief, instead left a trail of destruction. Lucas and I grew more cautious, the weight of our actions pressing heavily upon us. Thomas began to notice the tension. One evening, he looked at me from across the living room, his gaze lingering. "Is something going on?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I reacted quickly. "No, why do you ask? You've been distant lately, and Lucas seems different too." "I just hope everything's okay." Guilt swirled within me, suffocating and inescapable. For a few days after Naomi left town, Lucas and I maintained a careful distance, speaking only when necessary while Thomas was home. Thomas's presence in town was a rarity, a fleeting moment amidst his whirlwind of work. I hesitated to accept his dinner invitation, torn between my anxiety about leaving Lucas alone and the discomfort of feigning normalcy in front of Thomas. As we settled in with our appetizers, Thomas broached the subject that had been nagging at me for some time. "We've grown apart, haven't we?" he asked cautiously. I froze mid-bite, grappling with the weight of his observation. "What makes you say that?" he continued, his drink swirling in front of him. "I don't know. Maybe it's the stress from work, but it feels like you're somewhere else lately, like your heart's not in it anymore." Guilt washed over me, and I forced a smile. "You've been busy, Thomas. Maybe we just need to make more time for each other." The hollow echo of my words lingered, underscoring the unsettling realization that we were merely going through the motions. 2 days later, a package arrived at our doorstep, addressed to Thomas. I found it on the kitchen counter after a routine errand. The sight of Naomi's handwriting on the envelope sent a chill racing through me. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a USB drive accompanied by a note that read, "I thought you'd like to see what your wife and son have been up to." The implications were unmistakable. Naomi had been watching us. Panic surged as I shoved the note and USB into my pocket, the thought of what might have happened if Thomas had discovered it first haunting me. I reached out to Claire without delay. She was still delving into Naomi's background. Her firm voice grounded me amid the rising panic. "Did Thomas see it?" she pressed. "No, I got to it first," I said, striving to maintain my composure. "We need to destroy it. Whatever's on that drive cannot see the light of day." That evening, when silence enveloped the house, I locked myself in the study and plugged the USB into Thomas's computer. My hands shook as I scrolled through the files and photos. They were innocuous enough, but hinted at a truth that could dismantle our lives if Thomas ever laid eyes on them. I deleted everything and crushed the USB underfoot, but the damage was done. The following morning, I confronted Lucas about Naomi's latest move. "She's still coming after us," I said, worry tightening my voice. "I'll handle it," Lucas replied, his expression darkening. "No," I asserted. "We need to end this for good." "How do we do that?" he asked, jaw clenched. I took a deep breath. "We can't keep waiting for her to strike." Slaw came through again, digging into Naomi's past. She uncovered that Naomi had been fired from her last job for embezzlement. Armed with this information, Lucas and I devised a plan to confront Naomi once and for all. We arranged to meet her at a motel on the town's outskirts, away from prying eyes. Naomi arrived late, her demeanor smug as she entered the room. As we confronted her with evidence of her embezzlement, her confidence began to wane. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" she sneered. "You're the ones with something to lose." But we stood resolute, our determination clear. We would not be swayed by Naomi's threats or lies. We were ready to dismantle her games and reclaim our lives. As Naomi's bravado crumbled, we knew we had her cornered. This was our moment to end her reign of manipulation. "This is blackmail," she hissed, eyes wild. "I'll call the police if you don't leave us alone." "Naomi, let's just talk. I won't say a word. But if you try anything else, I will have no choice but to call the police," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Her facade cracked, tossing the folder onto the bed before storming out. The fleeting relief that followed was soon overshadowed by mounting tension. A week later, I faced Thomas in our kitchen. "Something's not right," he said, his tone cold and accusatory. "What are you talking about?" I feigned ignorance, but my heart raced. "You and Lucas," he stated bluntly, his gaze piercing through the carefully constructed barriers I had erected. "I've seen how he looks at you, and how you look at him." My blood ran cold. "That's ridiculous," I snapped, trying to mask my fear. But Thomas's gaze remained steady, piercing through my facade. "Is it him?" he pressed, the certainty in his voice making me uneasy. "I want the truth." The walls felt as if they were closing in. "There's nothing to tell," I whispered, but the conviction in my words was weak. Thomas didn't seem convinced, and his accusation lingered heavily in the air. The tension in the room was suffocating, pushing against my composure. "Thomas, please," I implored, desperately trying to redirect the conversation. "If something's bothering you, let's discuss it. Please don't throw around baseless accusations." His voice rose, cutting me off. "Then why is Naomi saying otherwise?" My heart sank at the mention of her name. "Naomi?" I echoed, panic rising in my chest. Thomas nodded sharply, his expression grim. "She called me, told me things I didn't want to believe. She said she had proof." I took a deep breath, struggling to steady my racing pulse. "She's angry that Lucas moved on. She's simply trying to stir trouble," I insisted, locking eyes with him, hoping my words carried weight. But Thomas, unyielding, turned and left the room without another word, leaving me feeling isolated and exposed. That evening, Lucas came to my room, tension etched on his pale face. "What's going on?" he asked, closing the door behind him. "Thomas knows something," I said, my voice trembling. "Naomi must have gotten to him before we could put a stop to her." Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, his fists clenched. "What do we do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But if he learns the truth, he won't believe us." "He has to believe us," Lucas responded firmly, but I could see the fear mirroring my own in his eyes. The following evening, Thomas insisted we have dinner together as a family. His request felt rare and almost forced, setting my nerves on edge. As we sat around the dining table, the clinking of silverware punctuated the heavy silence. After a while, Thomas broke it. "How's the job search going?" Lucas looked up, momentarily caught off guard. "Fine, Thomas raised a hand, cutting him off. "We've all gotten too comfortable with this arrangement, haven't we? It's not healthy." Without warning, Lucas stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If you've got something to say, just say it." The atmosphere thickened, and I struggled to find my words. dread pooling in my stomach. Out of the blue, Lucas asked, "How's the job search going?" He looked up, caught off guard again. "Fine. I've been exploring a few opportunities." Thomas nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. I was starting to wonder if you planned on staying here indefinitely." The comment hung in the air, pointed and sharp. Lucas stiffened. "It's not like I'm in your way," he replied softly. Thomas's gaze flicked to me before returning to Lucas. "No, but I felt uneasy watching their back and forth." "You should move on, don't you?" I suggested, hoping to clarify the tension. Thomas held up a hand, cutting me off. "We've all become a bit too comfortable with this arrangement. It's not healthy." Lucas stood abruptly, the chair protesting beneath him. "If you've got something to say, just say it." Thomas leaned back, his posture relaxed yet charged. "Maybe it's time to move on. I was about to mention something, but..." "Enough," I interrupted, feeling the tension spike. "We've all become complacent. It's not good for us." Clearly upset, Lucas shot up from his seat once more, the chair scraping against the floor. "I think it's time for some honesty from both of you." My heart raced as Thomas locked eyes with me, the room feeling smaller under the pressure. Before I could speak, Lucas stepped closer, his voice firm. "There's nothing to say. Naomi's lying. She's trying to mess with us because I broke things off with her." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Why would she drag Ava into her lies?" Lucas replied earnestly, "She's desperate. She'll do anything to get back at me, and involving Ava was just the easiest way to hurt me." "Are you asking me to believe that?" Thomas challenged. "Yes," Lucas insisted, "because it's the truth." The room fell silent, thick with tension. Slowly, Thomas rose from his chair, deliberate in his movements. "Maybe it is," he acknowledged, "but until I'm convinced, I think it's best you find somewhere else to stay." Lucas met my gaze, an unspoken question hanging in the air. I wanted to urge him to stay and fight this together, but I knew it would complicate matters further. "It's fine," Lucas said quietly. "I'll go to the house. It feels emptier without you." Thomas seemed satisfied with his absence, though his suspicion toward me lingered. Every day, I called Lucas, though our conversations remained brief and strained. He had rented a small apartment on the other side of town and was trying to focus on work, but frustration seeped through his voice. "I hate this," he confessed one night, his voice heavy with frustration. "Being away from you feels like letting her win." I tried to reassure him it was only temporary, even though doubt gnawed at me. The distance was wearing us down. Just when I thought things couldn't slip further into chaos, Naomi made her boldest move yet. One afternoon, while I was running errands, she stormed into Thomas's office. She lacked concrete proof but cast just enough doubt to rattle him. When I returned home, Thomas was waiting for me, the tension in the air as thick as fog. "Naomi came to see me," he said, his tone icy as he stared me down. "She told me everything, or at least enough to make me question your words." "She's lying," I shot back, desperation creeping into my voice, a tight knot forming in my stomach. "Is she?" he snapped, frustration etching deeper lines into his face. "It's starting to feel like everyone's lying to me." The silence extended between us, palpable and heavy. I sank into a chair, feeling the weight of his gaze. "I'm telling you," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "She's lying." "Is she?" he repeated, his hurt cutting through the tension. Each word hung in the quiet room, heavy and unresolved. Then he stood abruptly, striding toward the door. "I'm leaving. Don't bother calling me until you're ready to tell me the truth." Thomas didn't return that night or the night after. I reached for my phone, but he wouldn't answer. The silence of the house pressed down on me, and for the first time, I wondered if I had genuinely lost everything. A few days later, Lucas dropped by, concern etched on his face as he walked through the door. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, pulling me into a tight embrace. "I don't know," I admitted, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I just don't know." He stayed with me that night, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like there might still be hope. But deep down, I knew the damage was done, and our lives would never return to how they once were.